Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching this. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories, just like this one. Now, before the story begins, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how November feels different? The air turns colder, the nights grow longer, and sometimes it feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something we can't see. Tell me honestly, have you ever felt that strange chill, the kind that doesn't come from the wind? Why do you think so many horror stories begin in November? Think carefully, because somewhere inside this video, you'll find the answer. Watch till the end, and when you hear it, tell me in the comments if you guessed it right. I've lived through 2 Colorado winters since my divorce, but there's one night I can never forget. The night the snow fell so thick that it seemed to bury all sound. That night, the world outside was quiet, peaceful, and deceivingly safe. My name's Ethan Marsh, and at the time I was 28, newly single, and trying to start over. I'd rented a second-floor apartment in an old 2-story Victorian on Logan Street, just outside downtown Boulder. It wasn't much. Creaky floors, stubborn radiators, windows that whistled in the wind. But it was mine. Mine and Harvey's, my golden retriever mix who'd stuck with me through everything. That night, snow had been falling since late afternoon, coating the sidewalks in soft, untouched powder. By the time I clocked out from my warehouse shift around 9:30, the city was a blur of white. Harvey was waiting by the door, tail wagging, leash in mouth, his way of reminding me that no matter how cold it got, our nightly walk was non-negotiable. So I bundled up, tugged on my heavy boots, and stepped out into the storm. The air bit at my face, and the snow squeaked beneath every step. The streets were empty. Even the usual hum of traffic from the main road had faded into silence. Boulder looked frozen in time. Harvey darted ahead, nose down, following invisible trails under the street lamps. I let him lead. The cold was numbing, and my thoughts were wandering, mostly about how weird it felt living alone again. 6 months earlier, my life had been predictable. Dinner at 7, Netflix by 9, asleep before midnight. Now it was just me and the dog, and the soft hum of the radiator at night. As we turned the corner toward my building, I noticed how clean everything looked, like the snow had erased all imperfections. No footprints, no tire marks, no noise, just the sound of Harvey's paws and my boots crunching against the powder. And that's when I saw it. From the street, I could see the window to my living room, the one I always kept the curtains tightly closed on. Except tonight, the curtains were slightly parted. A thin slice of warm light glowed from within, spilling faintly onto the snow below. I stopped mid-step. Had I left the lamp on? Maybe. But the curtains being open? I was sure they weren't when I left. Harvey whined softly, tugging the leash toward the stairwell. I brushed it off, telling myself the draft must have moved them. The old heater made the curtains sway sometimes. That was all it was. We trudged up the interior stairs, Harvey's paws leaving little wet marks on the carpet. The closer I got to my apartment door, the more something felt off. Through the wood, I could hear faint noise. The TV. But instead of the basketball game I'd been watching before leaving, there was a weather report playing. The steady, monotone voice of a meteorologist echoed softly from inside. Weird. I never switched the channel. I unlocked the door, and Harvey rushed in, making a beeline for his water bowl like always. I stood in the doorway, staring at the TV. The local news was on, showing footage of snowy highways. The remote lay exactly where I'd left it on the coffee table. I changed the channel back. The basketball game was still live. Fourth quarter. Okay, maybe a glitch. Or maybe I'd left it on autoplay. Still, something about the air inside felt wrong. The apartment was too warm, uncomfortably warm, as if the heat had been running non-stop. And there was a smell. A faint, unpleasant mix of wet clothes and stale tobacco smoke. No one had smoked in here. Ever. Harvey had finished drinking and was now standing rigid near the coat closet by the door. His tail was stiff, ears pinned back, body trembling slightly. He let out a low growl, one I'd never heard from him before. I tried to calm him down. "Hey buddy, it's okay." But before I could even take a step, I heard it. A sound so small and yet so unnatural in that silence. A cough, muffled, human, coming from inside the closet. I froze completely. My breath caught halfway in my throat, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But Harvey didn't move. He stood there, staring at the closet, his teeth barely visible between the growls. Then I saw it. Beneath the accordion-style door, a shadow. 2 boots. Big ones, with melting snow pooled around them. Every instinct I had screamed run, but my brain was stuck on meaningless details, like how the melting water would stain the wooden floor. I grabbed Harvey's collar and backed slowly toward my bedroom. My phone? Where was it? In my pocket? In my jacket? I couldn't remember. Behind me, the ceramic bowl holding my keys slid off the counter and shattered on the floor. The noise broke the silence like glass, and that's when the boots moved. Fast. Toward me. I yanked Harvey into the bedroom, slammed the door, and hit the small push-button lock, knowing full well it wouldn't stop anyone determined. My hands shook so bad, I almost dropped my phone while dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered as quietly as I could. Someone's in my apartment. Please, I'm at 327 Logan Street, apartment 2A. He's here, he's inside. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost too calm. Stay on the line, officers are on their way. Don't leave the room. But I could barely hear her over the sounds outside. The faint thump of footsteps on my hardwood, drawers opening, the metallic slide of a utensil drawer. My heart sank. That's where I kept the kitchen knives. I positioned myself between the door and Harvey, clutching the old aluminum baseball bat I kept next to the nightstand. My breathing was shallow. Every creak and footstep made my pulse spike. Then, silence. For 10 long seconds, nothing. Not a sound. Then came a slow, deliberate turn of the doorknob, a click against the cheap lock, and then a laugh. Quiet, raspy, almost playful. That was somehow worse than anger. It wasn't the laugh of someone frustrated at being caught. It was the laugh of someone enjoying it. The footsteps retreated, back into the hallway, into my living room. I could hear things being moved, furniture scraping, paper rustling. He wasn't rushing. He was taking his time. The dispatcher was still talking, her voice a soft hum through the phone. I barely registered her words. All I could do was whisper, "He's still here. Please hurry." Please then, the faint wail of sirens began to cut through the storm, distant at first, then closer. The sound must have startled him. The movement stopped immediately. Heavy boots pounded toward the front door, and then a slam. Gone. I waited, frozen, until the sirens were right outside, red and blue lights flickering through my window blinds like reflections in water. Only then did I unlock the door. The apartment looked like a war zone. Drawers pulled out, couch cushions thrown across the floor, papers scattered like confetti. The closet door hung open, and the coats inside still swayed slightly, like something had just moved them. Wet boot prints led from the window to the closet, then across the apartment and out the front door, still wide open. 2 young officers arrived first, followed by a female detective, Detective Rachel Knox. She was calm, professional, and clearly had seen worse. After a quick look around, she called in the crime scene team. They found the window latch broken, wood splintered around the frame. Whoever had come in had used the fire escape that ran up the side of the building, the same one I'd passed earlier, covered in untouched snow. Except now, I realized that untouched snow hadn't been untouched at all. He'd brushed it back into place after climbing up. He'd been planning this. Detective Knox explained there had been a string of similar break-ins across the area, all during snowstorms, all targeting second-floor apartments with exterior fire escapes. Every time, the intruder would enter quietly, eat something from the fridge, smoke, and sometimes even watch TV. He never stole much, a strange pattern that made it harder to track him. But this was the first time anyone had come home while he was still inside. When the crime scene unit finished dusting for prints, Detective Knox called me over to the kitchen. On the counter sat a half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich made with my bread and cheese, and a half-empty bottle of my IPA beer, condensation still fresh on the glass. He had time to make himself dinner, she said quietly, shaking her head. He wanted you to feel it, that someone had been here, using your things. It made me feel sick, knowing that while Harvey and I had been walking in the snow, someone had been inside, touching my stuff, sitting in my chair, maybe even watching out the window as we came back. They caught him 5 days later. Another snowstorm, another apartment just a few blocks away. This time, the owner had installed cameras after hearing about the break-ins. The footage was clear. A man in his 40s, climbing the fire escape in heavy work boots and a torn denim jacket. His name was Martin Hale, 44, a former maintenance worker who'd been living in his car after getting evicted that summer. When the police searched his vehicle, they found a small notebook with handwritten notes, addresses, routines, and observations. Next to 327 Logan Street. Apt 2A, he'd written, young male, dog, walks 9:30 p.m., works nights. Good spot, Detective Knox told me over the phone. He watched you for weeks, she said. Waited for a night with snow to cover his tracks. He pled guilty to multiple counts of unlawful entry and burglary. The court gave him 18 months, with parole possible in 9. 9 months. 9 months for breaking into people's homes, hiding in closets, and eating their food like he belonged there. I moved out a few weeks later, found a ground-floor apartment across town. No fire escape, no back alley. But even now, every time it snows, the silence hits me differently, because that's when the world goes still enough to hide footsteps, still enough for someone to move quietly outside your window. I still walk Harvey every night, but I keep a flashlight in my pocket and my phone in my hand. I check every lock before bed, every closet, every curtain. And every now and then, when I come home and see something slightly out of place, a pillow angled wrong, a window curtain barely parted, I remember that muffled cough from the closet, the shadow of those boots, and that quiet, rasping laugh. I tell myself it's all in my head. But when the snow starts falling and the city goes quiet again, I can still feel that same chill in my bones, like someone's waiting, just out of sight. The week after Halloween always feels hollow in our neighborhood, like the air itself is trying to sober up after all that sugar and noise. That particular Monday night in 2019 was no different. I'd just tucked my son, Ethan, into bed around 8:30. He was 6, full of leftover candy, and still buzzing from the night before. I was 34, freshly divorced, trying to juggle work, parenting, and pretending I wasn't terrified of doing both alone. Our house sat on the edge of Maple Hollow, a small suburb outside Columbia, Missouri. Quiet, safe, boring. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself after moving in 6 months earlier. By 9:30, I was halfway through folding Ethan's laundry while a rerun hummed softly on the TV. That's when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought maybe it was one of my neighbors, but nobody ever came by that late on a Monday, especially not in early November, when the streets went dark before dinner. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people standing on my porch. They were both wearing hoodies, hands stuffed in pockets, faces hidden in the shadow. From their size, I guessed they were teenagers, maybe 16, 17. They were whispering and laughing, that awkward, nervous kind of giggle kids have when they're up to something stupid. Maybe some leftover Halloween prank, I thought. Without opening the door, I flipped the porch light on and off, my polite way of saying, "Not tonight." They just looked at each other, laughed louder, and ran down the driveway into the dark. I locked the deadbolt and went back to folding clothes. But the longer I stood there, the weirder it felt. The taller one had kept his head tilted down the whole time, never looked up once. And the shorter one? That laugh. It wasn't right. It had this unnatural rhythm, almost like it was being timed. I brushed it off. Teenagers are weird, always have been. I poured myself some chamomile tea, double-checked the locks, and sat on the couch with my laptop. About 10 minutes later, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, deliberate, perfectly spaced. It was coming from the back of the house. I froze, tea halfway to my mouth. The sound came again. Tap, 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 tap. Our sliding glass door opened onto the backyard deck. And of course, the motion light had been broken since August. It was pitch dark out there. I put my mug down, grabbed my phone, and crept toward the kitchen, staying low, trying not to make a sound. From behind the kitchen island, I could barely see the outline of someone standing just beyond the glass. A silhouette. Tall. Still. One arm raised like it was about to knock again. It didn't move, didn't say a word. Just stood there, breathing, I think. I could feel the pulse in my throat as I slowly unlocked my phone. I hadn't called 911 yet. I didn't even know what to say. Then, the sound changed. A metallic rattle. The door handle being tested. Soft at first, then harder. Whoever it was, they were checking if it would open. My phone screen glowed against my face in the dark. And I swear, the silhouette twitched like it had noticed the light. I slid to the side, crouching lower. Then, silence. A few seconds later, I heard something else. From the other side of the house, a scraping sound, like metal dragging along wood. That's when I realized what was happening. They were checking the windows, one by one. Slowly, getting closer to the bedroom side, to Ethan's room. That broke me out of my paralysis. I hit call on 911. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered, "Someone's trying to break into my house. My 6-year-old's asleep. Please, please hurry." She kept her voice calm, told me officers were being dispatched, about 5 minutes away. Told me to stay put. But I couldn't. I moved down the hallway toward Ethan's room, phone pressed against my ear, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear the dispatcher. That's when I heard it. A laugh. That same mechanical, glitchy laugh I'd heard earlier. Only this time, it was coming from outside Ethan's window. I saw shadows through the curtains. 2 figures. One of them bent down, doing something to the window screen. I rushed in, grabbed Ethan, still half asleep, wrapped him in his blanket and whispered, "Shh, buddy. We're playing a hiding game, okay? Quiet as a mouse." He nodded, sleepy and confused. I carried him into my bedroom closet on the opposite side of the house, shut the door, and crouched down between hanging coats. The dispatcher was still talking, but her voice sounded distant now. My blood was roaring in my ears. Then, a new sound from the front door. Not knocking this time, but scratching. Metal scraping against metal. The sound of someone picking the lock. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then silence again. Even the dispatcher stopped talking, like she sensed it too. She whispered, "Officers are 2 minutes out. Stay where you are." I held Ethan tight. He had fallen back asleep against my shoulder, breathing softly. For a moment, everything was still. Then I heard it, directly above us. Footsteps. Slow, careful, on the roof. I nearly dropped the phone. Our attic hatch was right in the hallway. Just a simple panel with a pull-down ladder. No lock, no latch. And those footsteps were right above it. The boards creaked, shifted. Whoever was up there, they were moving. The dispatcher must have heard my breathing change because she whispered again. "They're pulling onto your street right now. You'll hear the sirens any second." And then, as if on cue, the faint wail of sirens filled the distance. The footsteps above us scrambled. Running now. Fast. Heavy. There was a thud, someone jumping down, probably onto the deck. And then nothing. The dispatcher told me to stay put until the officers cleared the house. Those 3 minutes felt like an hour. When the officers finally called out that it was safe, I stepped out of the closet with Ethan still in my arms. He had no idea what had just happened. He just mumbled, "Did we win the game, Mom?" And I almost cried. They found footprints in the flower bed under his window. The window screen had been cut, clean and sharp, like with a utility blade. The front door lock had marks, scratch patterns from a tool. But the real nightmare came the next morning. A detective came back to check my doorbell camera footage, the one I'd forgotten even existed. When we pulled up the video, I felt my stomach turn. The smaller figure, the one I thought was a teenager, was wearing a mask. A latex Halloween mask of an old woman's face, pale and wrinkled. The taller one, the one who'd never looked up, was wearing a cheap plastic child's mask, a little boy's face. The footage showed them standing there while the shorter one rang the doorbell and laughed. And the taller one? He was holding duct tape. The detective's face changed instantly. He made a call for backup. Turns out there had been 3 other break-ins across nearby counties that week, all with the same pattern. A decoy at the front door, while another man tried the windows or back door. Always targeting single mothers with children. 2 days later, police caught them in Osage Beach, trying the same thing. The taller man was a 42-year-old parolee from Arkansas. His accomplice, the teenager, was actually his 18-year-old nephew. Inside their van, they found zip ties, rope, duct tape, gloves, and a notebook filled with addresses and notes, including mine. Under my address, it said, "Lights out 9:15, son's room left side. Mother checks windows once. No dog." They'd been watching us for weeks. The man was convicted the following spring and sentenced to 25 years. But that doesn't really fix it. We moved to Tennessee soon after, and even now, 6 years later, when someone knocks on my door after dark, even if it's just a delivery driver, I still freeze. I still check every window, every lock, twice. Because I know, once you've looked through a peephole and seen something pretending to be human, you never really feel safe again. November always felt strange in Maple Hollow. Maybe it was the way the air carried this quiet chill, or how the sky seemed to hang lower each day. Heavy, gray, and endless. I had just turned 17 2 months earlier, and that fall felt like waiting for something to happen. Something I couldn't quite name. My two best friends, Eli Turner and Haley Brooks, lived just down the street from me. We'd been inseparable since second grade. Same school, same neighborhood, same late-night walks when we couldn't sleep. That Saturday night, the first weekend of November, was the Thompson family's annual leftover Halloween bonfire. It was one of those small-town things everyone went to, even if they pretended not to care. The Thompsons had this huge backyard by the woods, and every year, Mr. Thompson would build a fire so big it looked like it could melt the stars. Everyone brought leftover candy, and he'd tell the same ghost stories he'd been telling since the 90s. It was tradition, and in a town like Maple Hollow, tradition was everything. We stayed later than usual that night. Most people left around 10, but the three of us lingered by the fire long after the little kids were gone. Mr. Thompson had gone inside, and only the crackle of burning wood and the hiss of the cold wind breaking through the trees filled the air. When the fire burned low, we decided to walk home, taking the long route through Sycamore Street, just to stretch out the night a little more. The streets were almost empty. A few porch lights glowed orange, and some old jack-o'-lanterns still sat on porches, sagging inward with mold and rot. The neighborhood felt calm, familiar, safe. Eli was joking about Mr. Thompson's terrible ghost story, doing this ridiculous imitation of his voice. And Haley was laughing so hard she kept bumping into me. For a second, I remember thinking this was one of those small, perfect nights I'd never forget. Then I noticed the van. It was about half a block behind us. A beat-up white cargo van, no logos, no windows on the back. It was moving slow, too slow. At first I told myself it was nothing, probably someone lost. Delivery guy, maybe. But when we passed under the first streetlight, I noticed how the van slowed down too, like the driver wanted to see us better. Then it picked up speed again in the shadows. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did Haley. But I could tell from the way she stopped laughing that she'd noticed it too. When we turned onto Sycamore, the van turned too. That's when my stomach dropped. The engine made this weird grinding sound, deep and uneven, like something was wrong with it. Every few seconds it revved just a little, as if the driver was tapping the gas pedal. "Hey," Haley whispered, gripping my arm. "You see that, right?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Let's maybe cut through the park." Shortcut home, Eli finally turned around, noticed the van creeping behind us, and his face lost all color. "Okay, what the hell?" he started. But before he could finish, the van turned off its headlights. Just like that. Complete darkness, except for its orange running lights, glowing like eyes. We started walking faster. Not running, not yet. Just quick steps, like we were pretending everything was fine. The van matched our pace. Then, without warning, it sped up and rolled past us, maybe 100 feet ahead, before pulling sharply into a driveway on the right. The house was dark, every window black. I knew whose place it was, the Kellers. They were out of town for the week. Their daughter, Megan, was in my chemistry class and had bragged about going to Florida for her cousin's wedding. The van just sat there in their driveway, lights off, engine idling softly. Waiting. Haley squeezed my wrist so hard it hurt. "He's waiting for us," she whispered. Eli looked pale. "We should go back the other way," he muttered. "Now." We started to move, but before we took 2 steps, the reverse lights flashed on, and the van began to back out slowly toward us. That's when we ran. No words, just fear. We bolted across the street, cutting through a stranger's front yard. My shoe snagged on something, maybe a sprinkler head, and I almost went down, but Haley yanked me back up by my jacket. Behind us, the van's engine roared. Tires squealed against the pavement as it turned around. Then, a door slammed. That sound froze my blood. Someone had gotten out. We sprinted harder, darting between houses, crashing through flower beds and fences, until we reached a backyard I didn't recognize. A motion light snapped on, flooding us in white light. For a second I thought whoever was chasing us would see us clearly. But Eli was already pulling out his phone, hands trembling, trying to call 911. Come on, he muttered, fumbling his passcode twice before getting through. Haley and I crouched behind a shed while he talked to the dispatcher. My chest was burning. My legs felt like jelly. I kept waiting to hear footsteps, or the van's engine again. But the night was silent except for Eli's panicked voice and the wind rustling dry leaves. We squeezed through a gap in a wooden fence and found ourselves on Birch Lane, about 6 blocks from where it started. We ducked behind a parked SUV, breathing hard, while Eli kept the dispatcher on the line. "She says police are coming," he whispered, barely able to talk. I nodded, staring down the road. My brain kept replaying the image of that van sitting quietly in the Kellers' driveway. Waiting. The patrol cars arrived faster than I thought. 2 cruisers, lights flashing but sirens off. The officers separated us, asked what happened. My officer, an older guy with kind eyes named Sergeant Donnelly, didn't treat us like dumb kids making up ghost stories. He believed us. He called it in, described the van, then had us ride with him while we retraced our steps. When we got to the Kellers' house, I saw deep tire grooves in the gravel. Donnelly knelt down and touched them. "Still warm," he said quietly. He took photos, measured the width between the tracks, then told another officer to check the security camera at the Maple Hollow Credit Union. It faced the same intersection we'd passed before turning down Sycamore. By the time they dropped us at the station, my hands were still shaking. The dispatcher brought us those paper cups of hot chocolate, the kind that tasted like chalk, while we waited for our parents. An hour later, Sergeant Donnelly came back. His face said everything before he even opened his mouth. "They found the van," he said, "abandoned behind the middle school, engine still warm." He paused. Driver's door open. My throat went dry. He went on, slowly. Inside were several rolls of duct tape, a box of zip ties, and a small black notebook. The notebook had house addresses from your neighborhood written inside, including this one. He slid a photo across the table. It was the Kellers' address. Next to it the words, "Out of town," written in neat block letters. Under that were 3 entries with descriptions. Greater than male, 17. Brown hair, varsity jacket. Female, 16. Blonde, purple backpack. Male, 17. Glasses, dark hoodie. US, all of us. The van had been stolen from a small plumbing company 3 days earlier. 2 towns over. No fingerprints, no witnesses, nothing. When our parents arrived, they were terrified. My mom couldn't even speak. She just kept touching my face like she needed to be sure I was really there. For the next few weeks, nobody let us walk anywhere. Not to school, not to the store, not even to each other's houses. The police set up extra patrols around Maple Hollow. Everyone installed cameras. Neighborhood watch meetings were packed. And for a while, we all thought maybe that was it. Maybe whoever was behind that van had just moved on. But about 3 weeks later, Detective Lydia Cross from the county sheriff's office called us in. She said there'd been 2 other incidents in nearby towns. Same white van, same pattern. Except those kids hadn't been as lucky. She wouldn't tell us details, only that they were still investigating. She showed us a blurry still from the Maple Hollow Credit Union camera. The van was there, 7:48 p.m., circling the neighborhood. The driver's face wasn't visible, just a shape under a dark cap. But something in the way he sat, leaned forward, watching, made my stomach twist. Detective Cross said whoever it was had been watching us for at least 2 weeks. The notebook contained notes about our routines, when we left for school, which routes we took, even what days we stayed after for clubs. That part broke something inside me. We thought it was random. It wasn't. We were being hunted. After that, I couldn't sleep for months. Every time a car slowed outside our house, I'd peek through the blinds. Every time I saw a white van, delivery or not, my body locked up. Haley started carrying pepper spray everywhere. Eli's older brother picked him up after school every day. Winter came, and life slowly went back to normal. At least, that's what we told ourselves. But none of us ever really forgot. Years passed. We all moved away for college. Different states, different lives. But every November, without fail, one of us texts the others. Greater than, "You good?" Still here. We don't need to explain what it means, because none of us can ever forget that night. The sound of that van reversing in the dark, patient, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. And sometimes, when I drive home late and pass through quiet neighborhoods, I still catch myself checking the mirrors. Because what scares me most isn't that the driver got away. It's the thought that maybe he never stopped watching. Snow was coming to Willow Creek that Sunday evening. You could feel it in the air before it even started. That heavy, electric stillness that always settles over upstate towns before a real storm. I'd been living in that duplex for only 10 days, long enough to start recognizing the creaks of the old floorboards, but not long enough to feel entirely at home. After my divorce from Michael, 23 years gone down the drain, I'd convinced myself a fresh start in a smaller town would be good for me. I found this narrow, 2-story duplex on Birchwood Avenue, about a mile from the middle school where I'd just started teaching math again. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood quiet, and the elderly landlord, Mr. Grayson, seemed kind enough when I met him. He lived in the other half of the duplex and told me he'd be right next door if anything breaks. The house smelled like old varnish and pine cleaner, and every time the heat kicked on, it carried a faint metallic scent, like something smoldering far away. But I told myself that's what old houses do. They breathe, they creak, they hum. That night after dinner, I was sitting on the couch grading papers when I heard it for the first time. A soft scraping noise, faint but steady, coming from beneath the living room floor. It was subtle, like the sound of someone slowly dragging a stick across cement. I muted the TV and listened. The sound stopped, then resumed. Probably the pipes, I whispered to myself. Old homes have personalities. The thought of going down to the basement didn't exactly thrill me. I'd only been down there once when I moved in, long enough to see the cracked foundation, the furnace, and a mess of tangled wires hanging from the ceiling. Mr. Grayson had told me to avoid the far side since it was technically his half. So I brushed it off and went to bed. But the noise came back the next night, and the night after that. By Wednesday, the scraping had grown louder, more rhythmic, like a deliberate movement. I crouched on the floor and pressed my ear against the boards. Something was there. When I called out, "Mr. Grayson? You down there?" The sound stopped instantly. No footsteps, no door slam, just silence. The next morning before work, I asked him casually in the driveway if he'd been storing anything under the floor or moving boxes in the basement. He shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "Haven't been down there in a while." "You might have raccoons again. Old ducks let 'em in sometimes." "Again?" I asked. He smiled vaguely. This place has had a few surprises over the years. That made me uneasy. Friday arrived with a warning of heavy snow, 6 inches by nightfall. The kids at school were buzzing about it all morning, and classes were dismissed early. When I got home, the streets were already blanketed white. Mr. Grayson's old Buick wasn't in the driveway, He'd mentioned going to stay with his daughter in Lake Champlain for the weekend. The house was colder than usual when I stepped in. I set my bags down, took off my boots, and instantly noticed something wrong. The rug in front of my couch, a cheap gray one from Walmart, was bunched up at one corner. I distinctly remembered straightening it before I left that morning. At first, I thought maybe the heater had kicked on and blown it, but as I knelt down to fix it, I caught a smell that didn't belong. Stale, sour, like old sweat mixed with mildew. Then came the scraping sound again, this time louder, right beneath me. Something moved under the floor. I froze, heart pounding. Grabbing my phone's flashlight, I walked to the kitchen and opened the basement door. The light switch at the top of the stairs flickered twice before a dim yellow bulb came on. The steps were narrow, uneven, and the air that rose up from below was cold and damp, smelling faintly of earth and rust. I called out again. "Mr. Grayson? Is anyone down there?" No answer. Just the echo of my voice, swallowed by the basement. Still, I descended slowly, my hand brushing the rough plaster wall for balance. When I reached the bottom, I swept the flashlight around. Cobwebs glistened in the corners. A row of old paint cans lined the wall beside the furnace, and in the far corner, half hidden by a sagging sheet of plywood, was a metal door I hadn't noticed before. Square and low to the ground. A coal chute. The door hung slightly open, and there were fresh marks on the concrete, like something had been dragged from the chute toward the center of the room. I stepped closer, shining my light inside. What I saw made my stomach turn. A rolled-up sleeping bag, empty food cans, a couple of plastic bottles of water, and a small stack of newspapers folded neatly in the corner. Someone had been living down here, and plugged into one of the basement outlets was a phone charger, the wire trailing into the shadows. My chest tightened. My knees went weak. Whoever this was, they weren't gone. I bolted upstairs, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly dropped my phone dialing 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. "Ma'am, are you in a safe place? I think someone's been living in my basement. I just found their stuff. Food, sleeping bag, and the coal chute's open." "Okay, stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Are you alone in the house right now?" "Yes, I think so." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. I dragged a chair under the doorknob and stood by the living room window, peering through the blinds into the snow. The storm had thickened, erasing the world outside into gray and white. The only light came from the porch bulb, faintly illuminating the driveway. That's when I saw him. A man, thin, hunched, wearing a filthy brown coat, standing half-hidden near the juniper bushes beside the house. His hair was matted, his posture crooked. He was watching me. I ducked down fast, my pulse slamming in my ears. The dispatcher was saying something, but all I could do was whisper, "He's outside. He's right outside. Lock all doors. Do not engage. Police are 5 minutes out." But the man stepped out of the shadows and began walking toward the front window. Slowly, and in his right hand, swinging casually between two fingers, was a key. My spare house key, the one I'd hidden under the flower pot behind the porch. He stopped right in front of the glass, staring in. The snow plastered against his coat. White flakes caught in his beard. And when he smiled, his lips cracked open to reveal yellowed, uneven teeth. He leaned forward, almost whispering against the window pane. "You moved my things." I stumbled backward, the chair screeching across the floor. He laughed, a raspy, broken sound, and then moved out of sight. I heard the crunch of boots in snow, then silence. The front doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then the slow, distinct click of a key turning. My body went rigid. He had the key. The door opened. "Ma'am, are you still there?" the dispatcher asked. "He's inside!" I screamed. "Stay quiet! Officers are almost there!" The floor creaked. His footsteps were slow, deliberate. I could hear him breathing, that damp, heavy sound like someone with a bad cold. "Mr. Grayson told me this side was empty," he said, his voice calm, conversational. "Said I could stay through the winter." I pressed my hand over my mouth. He was closer now, in the hallway. "You weren't supposed to move in yet," he said. "You took my space." I crawled backward into my bedroom and pushed the dresser against the door. The wood groaned under pressure as I shoved with all my strength. Then I heard his voice again, just on the other side. "You don't have to be scared. We can share." The knob turned, rattled. He pressed harder this time. The frame cracked near the lock, and then, faint but rising. Sirens. He froze. I heard him retreat, his boots clattering down the hallway, the front door slamming open and then shut. Through my bedroom window, I saw him sprint into the storm, disappearing toward the dark woods beyond the property. The police arrived minutes later. 2 cruisers, their lights bleeding red and blue through the snow. They searched the basement and found everything I'd seen. The sleeping bag, the food, a small notebook full of pencil notes detailing my routines, what time I left for work, what time I came home, even drawings of me sitting on the couch. His name, they later told me, was Earl Patterson, a local drifter who'd done handyman work for Mr. Grayson years ago. He'd fallen off the grid after being discharged from a mental health facility 2 winters earlier. Apparently, he'd been sneaking in through the old coal chute for weeks, maybe months, living beneath my floor, watching, learning, waiting. The police found footprints leading from the chute to the backwoods, but the storm buried them within the hour. They changed my locks that night and sealed the basement entry with heavy boards. A patrol car stayed outside until morning. I moved out within a week, left half my furniture behind. Mr. Grayson tried to argue about the lease, but after the police report, he didn't press. I found a new apartment. 3rd floor, solid walls, modern locks, and no basement at all. I still teach math. I still drink coffee on cold mornings. But now, when I hear a house creak or a pipe groan, I don't tell myself it's nothing. Because sometimes the noise under your floorboards isn't the house settling. Sometimes it's someone settling in. It was one of those nights that makes you question why anyone would choose this job. December, somewhere along the Dalton Highway in northern Alaska. A stretch of road so empty it feels like you're driving across the surface of the moon. The kind of cold that doesn't just sting your skin, it settles in your bones and stays there. I'd been running cargo up and down that route for nearly a decade, long enough to know every rest stop and radio dead zone. That night, I was hauling frozen meats from Fairbanks to Deadhorse, about 500 miles of snow, silence and nothingness. My rig, an old red Kenworth I called Lucy, rattled like hell when the wind kicked up. She wasn't pretty, but she'd never left me stranded. Around 11:30 p.m., I pulled into a gravel turnout near mile marker 214. My logbook said I had to rest, and my eyelids weren't arguing. There wasn't another pair of headlights for miles, just me, the truck's hum, and that big frozen black sky pressing down. I left the engine idling low, heater running, and crawled into the sleeper with my thermal socks and a sleeping bag built for Arctic expeditions. My phone showed no signal, as usual. Outside, the wind moaned against the trailer, that long, low whistle that sounds almost human when you're tired enough. I must have fallen asleep fast, because the next thing I knew, I was awake again. It was 1:27 a.m., and someone was knocking on my window. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it might have been my imagination. Long hours on the road can do that to you. But then it came again. Same rhythm, same calm, patient sound. I sat up, confused, heartbeat thudding in my ears. No headlights, no footsteps crunching snow. Just darkness outside, and the wind dying down to a whisper. I grabbed my flashlight from the wall, flicked it on, and leaned toward the window. A man was standing there. He stepped back as my light hit the glass. Tall, mid-40s maybe, wearing a red flannel shirt, jeans, and hiking boots. No coat, no gloves, no hat. But what really made my stomach twist wasn't what he wore. It was that his face was dripping with sweat. Sweat to -20 degrees. He blinked at the light and gave a small, awkward wave. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. "Sorry to wake you. My truck died a little ways back. Need a hand getting her going again?" His breath fogged just once before disappearing, and for a second, I thought maybe he wasn't breathing at all. I cracked the window an inch, not more, keeping one hand on the ignition key just in case. "What's the trouble?" I asked. "Engine turns. Won't start," he said. "Might be frozen fuel lines." Happens all the time, right? He forced a smile, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, and the sweat turned to tiny frost beads instantly. Now, here's the thing about long-haul trucking in winter. You learn fast who's real and who's not. Nobody walks half a mile in that cold without gear, and nobody sweats through their shirt doing it. Still, something in me wanted to believe him. Maybe he'd been in shock. Maybe he'd panicked. So I asked, "Where's your coat?" He hesitated, just for half a second, then chuckled, too loud. "Left it in the cab." Dumb mistake. I was so frustrated I just got out and started walking. Been 20 minutes now. Guess I got a little warm. He lifted something in his hand, a photo maybe. "My son's waiting for me tomorrow morning. Big hockey game. Can't miss it," but I couldn't see anything clearly. The photo caught my flashlight glare, showing nothing but a smudge of reflection. I didn't open the door. "Tell you what," I said. "I've got signal here. I'll call for a tow. Sit tight." That's when everything changed. His expression flattened. The friendly act dropped clean off his face like a mask slipping. His voice came out low now, steady but sharp. "No need for that. Just come give me a hand, all right?" 2 minutes. That's all. He took a step closer, and I saw it, his eyes. They weren't angry, just empty. Focused on me like I wasn't even human, like I was a job to finish. Then, from the corner of my mirror, I saw movement. A figure crouched near the back of my trailer, half hidden by snow shadows. My pulse kicked into overdrive. The man outside noticed me glance toward it, and his smile snapped back on. Forced, wide, wrong. "Come on, man. Don't leave me out here," he said, louder now. "We help each other out on this road." "That's how it works." He reached toward his pocket. That was it. I turned the key. The Kenworth roared alive, shaking the cab as exhaust smoke poured out the back. The man jumped away, hands up, but I saw his face twist in something between anger and panic. Behind me, the crouched shadow bolted, running for the tree line. I slammed the truck into gear, the air brakes hissing like a dragon waking up. Gravel spat from my tires as I pulled onto the highway, engine screaming against the cold. In my mirrors, I caught a glimpse of their vehicle, a black pickup parked just beyond the trees, headlights off but engine idling. Someone was sitting inside. No broken down truck, no stranded driver, just bait. I drove for nearly 50 miles before I let myself breathe again, hands shaking, sweat freezing under my collar. Every pair of headlights in the distance made me flinch. Around 2:15 a.m., I switched on my CB radio, flipped to channel 19, the trucker's lifeline. "Breaker 19, I said, voice trembling. "Anyone northbound past mile 214, keep your eyes open. Got some bad business out there. 3 of them." Black pickup hiding off the tree-line static answered first, then voices. A driver called himself Juno Jack came on. "Copy that, southbound. Heard something similar near Prospect Creek 2 nights back. Guy flagged down a rig pretending to need help. Driver's missing now." My gut twisted. For the next hour, the radio filled with stories, truckers who'd been followed, people who'd seen lights in the distance, and figured it was another hauler until it wasn't. The pattern was the same: someone pretending to break down, waiting in the cold for whoever was dumb enough to stop. By dawn, I reached a fuel stop outside Coldfoot. The clerk looked half asleep behind the counter. I told her what happened. She called it in to the state troopers, while I sat drinking bad coffee, staring out the window at the endless snow. A trooper arrived about an hour later. Woman, mid-50s maybe, with that tired look only Alaskans wear. She took my statement, jotting everything down on a clipboard. When I described the sweating man, she stopped writing for a second. "You said he was sweating?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Like he'd run a marathon. But he said he'd just been walking 20 minutes. She nodded slowly. "That tracks," she said finally. "Adrenaline. Most of them get wired before they do something stupid. You probably saved your own life." Apparently, it wasn't the first report she'd heard. Over the past month, they'd had half a dozen similar incidents. Drivers being lured out of their trucks, robbed, sometimes worse. The cold was killing the unlucky ones before the criminals even had to. I finished my coffee, hands still trembling. The trooper told me to get some rest before heading out again. But when I climbed back into my cab, I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw that man's face pressed against the window, smiling that wrong, empty smile, sweat freezing on his skin while he waited for me to make the mistake of trusting him. Now, no matter where I park, I never roll down my window. I sleep with a wrench beside the bed and the doors locked tight. And every time I pass mile 214, I keep my headlights low and my speed steady, because sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I can still see a figure standing by the roadside. No coat, no gloves, just waiting. I'd been burning out for months before I finally admitted it. Between deadlines, non-stop emails, and meetings that all sounded the same, my days had turned into noise. Sleep didn't help. Weekends didn't help. So when an ad popped up one night, unplug, unwind, and reconnect with yourself at the Stillness Retreat, I clicked it without thinking twice. It was a minimalist website. Soft beige colors, wide forest photos, and short text that promised silence, healing, and reconnection. No phones, no screens, no distractions. Just peace. The reviews were glowing, though a few felt strangely repetitive, like they'd been written by the same person. Still, the price was affordable, and I was desperate. I booked a week-long stay in rural Washington. The drive took nearly 6 hours from Seattle. My GPS lost signal halfway there, and I followed a printed map they'd emailed me earlier. A detail that felt quaint, almost charming at first. By the time I reached the turnoff, the sun was low, painting the woods in fading gold. A wooden sign appeared at the roadside. The Stillness Retreat. The arrow pointed to a narrow dirt lane lined with pines that looked untouched for decades. At the end stood a large wooden lodge, old, beautiful, but unsettlingly quiet. There were no cars except a few dusty vans parked near the side. When I stepped out, the only sound was wind through the trees and gravel under my boots. A woman in her 40s greeted me at the entrance. Her name tag read, Director Evelyn. Her voice was gentle, too measured to be spontaneous. Greater than, welcome to the stillness. You've arrived right on time. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cedar and cleaning chemicals. Candles flickered on every table, but there were no light switches, no visible electronics anywhere. Evelyn handed me a small canvas bag. Inside were beige linen clothes, a journal, and a wooden name tag with my name burned into it. Michael. We'll hold all electronic devices during your stay, she said kindly. Detachment is the first step toward clarity. I hesitated. Even my phone? Especially your phone. A younger man appeared behind her, holding a wooden tray filled with sealed envelopes. I dropped my phone and smartwatch inside one labeled number 47. He sealed it shut with a sticker that read, Freedom begins with silence. Dinner was served in a wide dining hall filled with long tables. Everyone wore the same beige uniforms, sitting upright, quiet. The food was plain, steamed vegetables, rice, herbal tea, and no one spoke except the staff, who stood at the walls watching us eat. When I tried to chat with the man beside me, he smiled faintly and whispered, Better not. They prefer quiet during meals. They? I asked, but he only lowered his gaze. Evelyn gave a short speech at the end of dinner. The world outside thrives on noise and distraction. Here, we return to order. Routine is freedom. Structure is peace. Everyone nodded like it was gospel. I tried to laugh it off, but as I walked back to my assigned cabin that night, I noticed something odd. The windows of every building were dark except the main hall. And somewhere behind the trees, I could swear I heard faint chanting. The next morning, a bell rang at dawn. We lined up outside in the courtyard as fog rolled between the trees. A tall man named Thomas, introduced as our guidance leader, led breathing exercises and mindful walking. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like every sentence had been rehearsed 100 times. Greater than, you've come here to release dependency, he said. You'll eat when we tell you. Rest when we allow it. Think when your mind is ready. Something about that last line didn't sit right. The schedule was strict. 6 a.m., morning silence, walk. 8 a.m., group meditation. 12 p.m., communal meal. 2 p.m., writing reflection. 6 p.m., evening silence. Every clock showed the same time, always noon, even when sunlight clearly shifted. No one was allowed to ask how many days were left. When I did, Thomas only smiled. Greater than time is what you came to forget. By the third day, the retreat started to feel more like a correctional camp. We weren't allowed to leave the property. The gates were locked and chained. A few guests had started pacing near the windows during meditation, eyes darting to the woods. At lunch, I asked a young woman, I think her name was Leah, how long she'd been there. She frowned, as if trying to recall. Greater than, I stopped counting after the second sunrise. Her eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where a staff member stood perfectly still, watching. Then she smiled nervously and whispered, just follow the schedule. It's easier that way. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air inside the cabin felt too still, too intentional. From my bed, I could see a dim light moving between trees. Not a flashlight, but more like lanterns in slow, deliberate motion. And underneath that, a rhythmic humming sound. Soft, pulsing, mechanical. When I opened the door to listen, 2 staff members were standing at the far end of the hallway, facing me. Neither moved. One raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. I shut the door. By morning, Leah was gone. Her bed was neatly made, her name tag removed. When I asked Evelyn about her, she said she completed her reflection process and chose to move on. That phrase, move on, echoed all day. I asked another guest, an older man named Harris what it meant. He whispered, "People disappear here. Don't ask questions. Just do what they say." At that point, I started to plan my escape. During the evening meditation, I slipped out quietly, pretending to use the bathroom. The path to the main gate was lined with lanterns, each one perfectly spaced, glowing dimly under the fog. The gate itself was massive, secured by a thick metal chain. When I tugged it, something inside the lodge clicked, like an alarm, but muted, internal. Within minutes, 2 staff members appeared from the darkness, walking calmly toward me. "Participants aren't permitted beyond the grounds," one said flatly. "Return to your quarters, Mr. Michael." The way he said my name made my skin crawl. When I protested, he added in the same monotone, "Greater than you agreed to the program. You will complete it." That night, I found the agreement form in my bag, a single sheet of paper I'd signed on arrival. It didn't list an end date, just one clause. Participants may depart only upon completion, as determined by retreat administration. The next day, the atmosphere shifted. People had stopped talking entirely. No one made eye contact anymore. Every meal, Evelyn stood at the head of the hall repeating the same mantra. Completion is peace. Disruption is disease. The staff wrote it on the walls, on whiteboards, even carved it into the wooden tables. By that night, the humming outside had grown louder, constant, like a machine buried under the soil, vibrating through the ground. I decided that if I didn't leave now, I never would. At dinner, I hid a metal fork inside my sleeve. When the lights dimmed for night reflection, I slipped out through a service corridor behind the kitchen. The hallway smelled of bleach and damp wood. Behind a metal door, I found a narrow path leading to the fence line. The chain was thick, but not unbreakable. I wedged the fork into the lock, twisting until my hands bled. Every sound echoed in that silence, the scrape of metal, the rasp of my breath. When the chain finally slipped loose, I froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, behind me. I didn't turn around. I bolted into the woods, the fog swallowing me whole. Branches tore at my clothes as I ran, tripping over roots and rocks. After what felt like an hour, I stumbled onto a road. Empty. No lights. No signs of life. I walked for miles until I saw headlights. A delivery truck slowed beside me, the driver rolling down his window. Greater than, "You all right, son? You look like hell." I told him I'd been hiking and got lost. He didn't press further. He drove me to a gas station on the edge of a small town called Shelton. At the police station, I tried to explain everything. The retreat, the locked gates, the people who vanished. They listened politely, then told me there was no record of any facility called the Stillness Retreat anywhere in Washington. No business license, no tax ID, nothing. When they sent a patrol out to the address I'd written down, they found only an overgrown lot with the remains of an old logging camp. No buildings, no signs, no lodge. They asked if I'd been drinking. I didn't argue. A week later, I checked online. The website was gone. No trace in my email, no booking receipt, nothing. Almost like it had never existed. But I still have the name tag. Plain wood. My name burned in black letters. Sometimes at night, I find myself tracing the edges of that tag, feeling the grooves of the wood, the faint smell of smoke. And sometimes, when my apartment goes quiet, too quiet, I swear I can hear that same low humming beneath the floorboards. The coast feels different after the season ends. When the tourists pack up their umbrellas and beach towels, what's left behind isn't peace. It's silence. And silence on the coast isn't calm. It's heavy. It hums with things you don't notice when the world is louder. I was there in late October, chasing a freelance photography project I'd picked up last minute. The client wanted a moody series of off-season seascapes, empty docks, closed motels, lonely dunes, that sort of thing. They offered me a small house to stay in, rent-free, just outside a fishing town in northern Maine. The owner said it used to belong to her grandfather and hadn't been used much since. The photos online showed a weathered gray cottage with faded sea blue shutters, perched on a small rise above the beach. It looked like a place that had seen too many storms, the kind of house that creaked even when nothing was moving. Exactly the kind of solitude I thought I wanted. I reached the town just before dusk. The streets were empty except for a single open diner and a bait shop with its lights flickering. From there, the road narrowed and twisted through a tunnel of wind-worn pines until the ocean reappeared, gray and endless. The cottage stood alone at the end of a dirt lane. A rusted mailbox leaned at an angle, and the air smelled like salt and damp leaves. The front steps bowed under my weight as I carried my camera bag inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, that faint, briny chill that old coastal houses never quite lose. Inside smelled like seaweed, wood smoke, and something else. The dry, almost sweet scent of paper left too long in a damp attic. The place was simple. A small kitchen that opened into a living room, faded wallpaper patterned with sailboats, 2 bedrooms, and a narrow staircase that led up to a locked door. A metal sign hung from it, the paint nearly gone but still legible. Storage only. I tried the knob out of habit. It didn't move. The owner had mentioned in her message that the upper floor wasn't accessible due to old structural damage. At the time, it sounded practical. I didn't think about it again that night. After unpacking, I walked down to the shore. The beach was silent except for gulls circling above the tide. The sky was a bruised blue, the sun just dipping behind the horizon. It was cold enough to make my breath visible. When I got back, the wind had picked up. It howled through the chimney and rattled the windows. I brewed tea, downloaded my day's shots, and settled on the couch to edit. Around midnight, I must have dozed off to the sound of waves. Then something woke me. It was faint at first, rhythmic, deliberate. Not the wind, not the ocean. Footsteps, slow and even, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. The upstairs. I sat up, heart hammering. The boards above creaked again, weight shifting, pacing. I told myself it had to be the house settling. Old places make noises. Except the sound had intention behind it. Pattern. Movement. Then came music. It was distant, muffled. A melody so fragile it barely carried through the walls. A waltz, maybe. Old-fashioned, like it was playing from a warped record. The sound grew clearer for a few seconds, then cut off. I grabbed my flashlight and crept up the stairs. Each step groaned like it might give way. At the top, I stopped before the locked door. No sound now. Only the steady beat of my pulse in my ears. I knocked once, softly. No answer. Then, a thud. A single, heavy thump from the other side. I stumbled back so fast I nearly lost my balance on the stairs. Something moved in there. Something alive. I bolted down to the living room, locked my bedroom door, and stayed awake until light broke over the horizon. Morning has a way of shrinking fears. The sunlight made everything look harmless again. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that the wind had warped through the beams just right to sound like footsteps, that the music was maybe a radio signal bouncing off the coast. Still, curiosity won. I took my camera outside and walked around the house. From the back lawn, I could see the roofline clearly, and the upstairs windows. There were 3 of them, all boarded up, the paint peeled in strips, revealing wood burned black underneath. I snapped a few shots for reference. Maybe the owner wanted photos for repairs. The boards looked old, untouched, but the middle one had a gap wide enough to show a slice of darkness behind it. No reflection, no movement, just dark. Later, while editing the photos, I decided to text the owner, a woman named Karen Holt. "Hi Karen, just checking. Any chance someone's been doing maintenance upstairs? Heard some noise last night, maybe from the attic area. Also noticed what sounds like old music, maybe a radio up there?" Her reply came within minutes. "There is no upstairs. That part of the house was sealed after a fire in 1978. I stared at the message, reading it again and again. I wanted to call her immediately, but something about her certainty made me stop. Instead, I typed, 'Got it. Thanks for letting me know,' and set the phone face down. That evening, the air felt thicker, heavier somehow. The ocean roared louder than before, the waves slamming against the rocks like fists. Inside, the temperature dropped fast. I turned on the radio just for background noise while I cooked. Static filled the room, then faded into a weather report. I left it on, not caring what was playing. By midnight, the wind was screaming through the cracks. Somewhere inside the house, a door creaked open. Then, faintly, the same music began again. The waltz. The same slow, warped rhythm. It wasn't coming from outside. It was above me again. I turned off the radio. The tune continued without missing a note. I sat there, frozen, flashlight in hand, watching dust drift in the beam as if time itself had slowed. The melody warped, slowed, and then, nothing. Silence. I didn't sleep. Instead, I scrolled through the pictures I'd taken that morning. Dunes, the shoreline, the cottage exterior. Then I saw it. In one shot, a wide frame of the back of the house, something caught in the reflection of the middle upstairs window. A faint outline. Not a shadow, not a trick of light. A figure. It was blurred, but unmistakably human, standing behind the boards, watching. The next morning, I went back outside to check the boards again. The nails looked old, rusted. The wood hadn't been disturbed. But when I touched one of the planks, black dust, ash, smeared onto my fingers. Underneath the smell of salt, there was something else. Burnt plaster. I followed it around to the back of the house and found a small hatch tucked under the eaves, almost invisible beneath the weathered siding. It was nailed shut, the wood warped and blackened. I didn't touch it again. By noon, I'd packed my things. I messaged Karen that there had been family trouble back home and that I'd be leaving early. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in my mirror until it was just a gray speck against the dunes. But right before the trees swallowed it from view, I thought I saw one of the boards on the upstairs window shift. Just slightly, as if something inside was pushing it outward. I didn't slow down to check. I drove until the coastline vanished behind me, and the sky turned the color of steel. Weeks later, when I finally developed my last roll of film, there was one photo I didn't remember taking. It wasn't a beach, or the house exterior, or anything I'd seen. It showed a narrow hallway, its wood walls scorched black. At the far end stood a gramophone, perfectly intact, its record spinning slowly. The frame was darker on the edges, like it had been burned in light. But the clarity of the gramophone was impossible. Crisp, detailed. I boxed that roll up and never looked at it again. Sometimes, though, when the wind hits my apartment windows just right, I swear I hear that same faint waltz, playing softly from somewhere above me. And now, it's time to reveal the answer to the question we asked at the start. Why does November feel so haunted, so alive with silence? Because November isn't just a month of endings. It's a month of return. When the warmth leaves the earth, something else slips through the cracks. The nights stretch longer, not because of the season, but because they have more time to listen. So tell me, did you already know that? Or did November just start to feel a little different to you too? Type your answer below, and remember, I'll be reading from the dark side of November.